Today I want to talk about personal finance. More specifically, I want to talk about the very basics of personal finance that most people seem to just not have much context to. By the end of the video, you should learn something new and have either an idea of how to improve your own situation or have the resources on hand to be able to figure out how to improve it. So if you're just a student graduating and trying to figure out life after school, someone that has been unhappy with being constantly stressed about money, or someone trying to educate yourself about financial health, then keep watching, as you will definitely find something useful in here. Alright, with the preamble out of the way, I would like to say a couple things that would not fit anywhere else in the video. There are very obviously a lot of resources on the basics of financial literacy and personal finance, then why make this video? Well, even though there are many resources, I just wanted to add another voice into the mix just to show how easy the basics are and how much implementing these basics can improve your life. I also wanted to add a bit of commentary to show how much of an impact some of these techniques have had on me. So, without any further ado, let's begin. You will notice that a lot of advice stems from being informed about your own situation and carefully paying attention to how it changes. Therefore, the very first step is to assess what your current situation looks like. So, look at all your accounts and start noting down all the money you owe, all the money you have already, and all the money you will be getting on a monthly basis. I would strongly suggest using some form of spreadsheet to track this. I personally use an Excel spreadsheet for all of this, but you could use Excel, Google Sheets, or whatever else you want. If you wish to use a fully fledged software solution for this, then you can check out a free service like Intuit's Mint for this, which should help with this and more things that I will mention further along in the video. However, since I do not use it, I'll not talk about it much more. Here is a bit of advice for tracking all these things. First, do not put all your debts together in one field. Keep each thing you owe money for in separate fields, as it will simplify tracking long term. And since most debt has different interest rates, it'll help you prioritize certain debt over others. Second, do make sure to note down the interest rate on any of your debts alongside the debt itself. As I mentioned before, it'll help with prioritizing certain debts over others, and I will explain why you would want to do that a little later on. Third, for your monthly income, only count your after-tax income. Even if you're expecting to get most of your taxes back through a tax return, it only comes once a year, but bills have to be paid every month. Last, but definitely not least, you should revisit this part of your spreadsheet roughly once a month and update each value as you go along. After all, it is a reasonable assumption that you will be paying off your debts, so the amount you owe should go down over time while your savings should go up. Now, doing this will take maybe an evening if you have a lot of accounts and different sources of debt and savings, but it will make sure that you have all this information readily available to you. The good thing is that once you have all this information laid out in front of you, a lot of other questions can be answered so much easier. A typical question is what to do with this information. Well, this answer depends, but the common denominator in this answer is to set a goal. If you're stressed out by your debt and you would rather be debt-free sooner rather than later, then your goal could be to pay back debt as soon as possible and potentially even at a much higher rate than normal. If you have limited debt or you have no problem with owing some money, and let's say you want to go traveling, then you could have a goal of saving up for a trip. It doesn't have to be a trip, it can be saving up for anything that costs a whole bunch of money. Either way, as you can see, your goals can be varied, but they're typically based on what matters to you, and also typically involve some form of savings. And the thing is, having a goal is great, but having a goal while having no planned path to achieving these goals is quite meaningless. This planned path is effectively what a budget is, so let's talk about it. I find that a lot of people are afraid of budgeting, mostly because they get stressed out that they cannot make the budget to ever work out and do not really have any idea as to what amounts to budget. Let me try and make budgeting way less scary and stressful by breaking down what it's actually supposed to do. The budget is a tool at your disposal to help you understand what you should spend money on and how much money you should spend on those things. Treat a budget as either that or as a framework helping maintain your financial health. If you're suddenly starting to run out of budget, then that should be a signal to you that you really need to either reevaluate your spending or maybe take some corrective action. Going outside of your budget is the first sign that you are unable to actually afford your current lifestyle. And let me point out something important. Being able to pay for something is not the same as being able to afford something. I will repeat this a lot, as in my opinion, this statement is one of the most important things to understand about basic personal finance. But that only addressed one part of people's main issues with budgeting. Let's address another. How much of your income should you allocate to what portion of your budget? Well, the rule of thumb, accepted by most people, is called the 50-30-20 rule. This rule of thumb is that you should spend 50% of your net income on necessities, 30% of your net income on wants, and the last 20% of your net income on savings. This sounds great, but it's still a bit vague, and there are a couple hidden asterisks and assumptions in here. So let's go through each of these sections together and try to disambiguate as much as possible. First are the necessities, and this part of your spending is very easy to understand. As already mentioned, the rule of thumb states that you should spend 50% of your net income on this section. This section includes housing, transportation, utilities, food, clothes, insurance, and all the other not so exciting things that you just kind of have to fork over cash for just to keep on living. This is the first area where an asterisk will appear for the first time, and the asterisk will typically be right beside the housing part of spending. This is because housing can get arbitrarily expensive. Therefore, there is yet another rule of thumb. You should not spend more than 30% of your take-home pay on housing. However, just because you should not spend more than 30% does not mean that you should spend exactly 30% of your net income on housing. After all, this leaves you with only 20% of your total paycheck to pay for food, transportation, utilities, and other necessities. Therefore, it's much more reasonable to aim for 20% or even lower if you can for housing. And I know that this may be difficult to achieve in cities like Toronto, Vancouver, New York, and San Francisco, but you will have to be realistic with yourself about your spending on housing. Now, there are a lot more rules of thumb on things like transportation, food costs, and other necessities, but in the interest of time, I will move on. I will leave discussing the wants section until a bit later, as I feel that explaining all the hidden assumptions in the savings section needs clarification first. When people talk about savings in this context, they're not actually talking about putting money into a savings account all the time. This section of your budget is supposed to be long-term savings, putting money aside for an emergency fund, and paying down your debts. The highest priority here is building up an emergency fund first. In case you do not know what an emergency fund is, it is simply a fund of money that you keep for emergencies, times when you are between jobs, or for other occurrences of large unexpected bills. The rule of thumb here is that you should keep 3 to 6 months of your spending on necessities in this fund. This is so that if you lose all your income sources, you have the time to find the next opportunity. Oh, and if you do not have any emergency fund and you are just starting out, it is typically suggested to just put away $1,000 to $2,000 into this fund as quickly as possible and build up the rest over a much longer time period. Let's move on to debt repayment. Here are a couple basic things to know. There is such a thing as good debt and such a thing as bad debt. Bad debt is debt that has a high interest, typically higher than 5% interest compounded yearly. Good debt is all debt that has an interest rate less than that. Another thing about debt is that there are two main strategies regarding paying off debt, especially when you're quite deep in the hole. The strategies are called the snowball and the avalanche methods. Now, since I'm personally unbelievably lucky to not have much experience with debt, I cannot say much about it, but I will link the page on debt repayment from the subreddit Personal Finance Canada in the description instead. Let me quickly mention long-term savings. When people talk about long-term savings, they mostly talk about retirement savings, and even more specifically, they typically talk about long-term investing. Now, investing is honestly not a basic topic, and there is too much to talk about to put that information in this video. Therefore, first focus on growing your emergency savings account and figuring out how you will be paying off your debts before starting to look too seriously at investing. If you're interested in finding out more about investing in Canada, then please let me know in the comments below, and I will try to make a video on the topic in the near future. Anyways, now that you know more precisely what the necessities and savings sections in your budget are, let's talk about the only remaining section, the wants. Everyone has wants, and those wants are super diverse. Some people want to travel, some people want to listen to the best headphones, some people want to just save a bunch of money, and some people just want to watch the world burn. All these wants can be budgeted and planned around, and sometimes you will be saving for all of these wants. Therefore, this section of your budget is where you get to have fun. However, if you want to be able to get some more expensive things like a trip abroad or a particularly expensive pair of headphones like the Meze Empyreans, or the Audi's LCD3s, or the Bizdayanas, or the Sennheiser HU1s. Wait, what was I talking about again? Oh, right. Budgeting for once. Yeah, you gotta be responsible with having fun if you want to be able to afford the more expensive things you want. Putting away money monthly towards some fun purchase or a trip is a great idea. But the thing is, the wants do not necessarily even have to be about spending money. You may want to pay back all your debt as fast as possible or build up wealth quickly. That can also be a goal you want to achieve with money. Then it will come out of your wants budget. As an example, my wants budget is currently almost completely occupied with building up my emergency fund, where I will basically make a 6-month emergency savings fund in just 7 months by dumping almost half of my after-tax income into the savings account. Couple small bits of advice. If you're saving money for something, make sure to not mix the money for other expenses. This can be as easy as tracking the money in a separate row of your current financial health spreadsheet for each thing that you are saving up for. Another thing is that your savings budget is not affected by you saving for something you want in the near future. In other words, if you put away $500 for a fun vacation, that does not mean that you cannot put $500 towards repaying debts, putting away money for an emergency savings fund, or for long-term savings. The savings budget must be adhered to almost religiously for it to be really worth it. In order to help you with making sure that the money for long-term savings and for the emergency fund is always flowing in, just lop off the 20% of your paycheck immediately and put it towards the savings budget before you have the chance to accidentally spend the money. Oh, and do try to have a physically separate account for at least your emergency fund, as that will make you less prone to spend money from it by accident or for the wrong reasons. The thing is, talking about budgeting is great and all, but implementing it is a whole different beast. To help tame this beast, the topic of spending tracking comes up right away, so let's talk about it. There is this phrase that gets thrown around a lot that states, what gets measured, gets done. Well, if adhering to your set out budget is what you want to get done, then tracking your spending is the way to measure the progress. First, let's talk about the mechanics of tracking your spending. Tracking your spending can be done in a number of ways, passively or actively. Passive tracking is either just going through all your spending at the end of the month, letting a resource like mint.com track it for you, with you just checking that everything is fine every once in a while, or only looking at your bill statements. This typically works for those that have been tracking their spending for a very long time, to the point that they do not need to do so actively. Someone that is not impulsive in their spending, or people that do not bother actually trying to track their spending besides just paying bills as they come. As you can see, this approach can range from being very financially irresponsible to being a sign of someone that has their basics down well. Since in this video we're talking about the basics of financial literacy, I will not focus on this much and move right along to active tracking. Active tracking typically involves you, well, keeping track of your spending actively. It can be as granular as checking against your budgets and remaining balances before every single purchase, analyzing your spending at the end of the day, or doing so at the end of each week. I would personally set a limit at 2 weeks, as any further than that is just too passive. Now, how you track your day-to-day spending is up to you, but I personally keep a tally for each month in a separate tab in my financial tracking spreadsheet. I literally put down the name of the thing I spent money on, how much money it was, when the purchase happened, and I even keep track of what the category the purchase was related to. Since I am personally not impulsive in my spending and rarely buy anything beyond the necessities or things that I have saved up for, I try to put my spending into my spreadsheet at the end of each week. Since I have been doing this for almost 4 months, I think I could just start checking in once a month, but not sure I want to get that passive yet. So let's quickly talk about why you would want to track your spending. Well, if you're someone that tends to buy things impulsively, then tracking your spending daily or even before every purchase can help keep your spending impulsiveness at bay. It is a damn good method of keeping yourself accountable to your budget, especially since you keep looking at it quite often. Another reason is that it actually can help you sleep at night and reduce stress. As an example, last week I was worried that I overspent quite a bit and went out of my budget because I did get upsold on a soundbar with the TV purchase I made, and I forgot how much was budgeted for that purchase. The worry was gnawing at me for a while, as I did not actually track my spending for a couple of weeks due to external factors. Well, I ended up putting all my expenses into the spreadsheet one evening and realized that I was just within my budget, even with the increased spending. And the thing is, I had this awesome feeling come to me for the first time in about 9 years. I had a feeling of being safe and secure. I'm not sure why it was then, but looking at all my spending working out, and the fact that I made very substantial progress towards my emergency savings made me feel very, very safe. The thing is, I have not felt financial security, or even stability for that matter, in 9 years, because life was quite difficult financially for my family. And the question of, can we pay tuition for high school next year, or can we even afford any university, or do we have enough money for the rest of the degree, always loomed over my head. That night, for the first time in almost 9 years, I realized that those questions are not quite as pressing anymore. I was no longer an international student, but a man with a stable job and finances on track for long-term stability. I slept quite well that night, let me tell you. Anyways, I'm starting to go on a serious tangent, so since I don't have much left to talk about the basics of personal finance, let me wrap up the video. Let's quickly summarize what was discussed. I basically told you how with minimal effort you can reduce stress and improve your financial situation. So why not take the next hour to set up a spreadsheet for yourself to first keep track of all your debts and savings, and maybe even start tracking your spending. Trust me, if you can keep up with doing it for around a month at first, you will be able to achieve so much with your own money. You will be surprised at how good it feels and how easy it is to attain basic financial healthiness. Well, anyways, looking back over the video, I have to say that I'm glad that I made it, even though it was one of the most difficult videos to write so far. This is because I had to put down so much of what has become almost second nature to me precisely enough to make a coherent video. But I'm happy I made it. I really hope that this video will be useful to some of you. So if you find what I talked about interesting, insightful, or helpful, then please consider subscribing to my channel and maybe even liking this video. That's everything I want to say today. Thank you for your time. Bye.